If you're exhausted, angry, or just feel like life's getting harder for no damn reason, you're not crazy. You're living through an economic extraction plan so brutal, it's leaving millions of Americans physically sick, mentally broken, and financially paralyzed. Over 59% of US adults now report being completely burned out. Half of working Americans say they don't even have one person they can rely on financially. And the worst part? The system's pretending it's all your fault. You're not just tired, you're being drained. While billionaires added $2.1 trillion to their wealth since 2020, tens of millions of Americans now work into their 70s just to afford groceries and rent. This isn't a glitch. This is the business model. Let me walk you through exactly how this system keeps you too tired to fight back and why burnout is no longer a symptom. It's the goal. Let me start here, because most people still think burnout is some kind of mindset issue, like you just need a vacation or a gratitude journal. That's outdated thinking, and honestly, it's dangerous. What millions of Americans are experiencing right now isn't just emotional exhaustion, it's biological burnout. Your nervous system is stuck in a permanent stress response, and the system knows it. Cortisol levels in working-age adults have been climbing steadily since 2020, and recent occupational health data shows that chronic stress markers are now appearing in people as young as their mid-20s. This isn't normal. When your body never exits threat mode, sleep quality collapses, digestion slows, immune response weakens, and decision-making deteriorates. That's not a personal failure, that's physiology. Employers love to frame burnout as resilience failure because it absolves them of responsibility. But here's the part most people don't realize. Companies actively benefit from a mildly burned-out workforce. Workers who are exhausted are less likely to organize, less likely to job hop strategically, and more likely to accept stagnant wages just to avoid disruption. Burnout becomes a form of labor control. And while corporate wellness programs throw around meditation apps and pizza Fridays, the underlying workload intensity has quietly increased. Productivity per worker is still near historic highs, even as real wages lag behind inflation-adjusted levels. That means people are doing more, under more pressure, for less purchasing power. And the system calls that stability. Meanwhile, healthcare systems treat the symptoms: anxiety meds, sleep aids, antidepressants, without ever addressing the root cause: sustained economic stress with no recovery window. This is why so many people say, "I'm tired even when I rest." Because rest doesn't work when the threat never leaves. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are reacting exactly the way a human body reacts when it's pushed beyond sustainable limits for years. And the scariest part? The system labels this mass biological burnout as adjustment. Time has become a luxury good in America. We talk endlessly about money, but the real burnout driver for millions of people is time poverty. You're not just underpaid, you're overscheduled, over-optimized, and constantly reachable. The average American worker now spends more hours per week engaged in work-related activity than they did 2 decades ago. And that includes unpaid labor, emails after hours, app-based scheduling, gig work on the side, and constant mental load. Even leisure isn't free anymore. It's fragmented, interrupted, monetized. You're never fully off. And here's the trick the system pulled. By keeping wages tight, it forces people to trade time for survival. Commutes get longer because affordable housing is farther away. Side hustles become mandatory, not optional. Errands expand because services are cut or automated poorly. Suddenly, every week feels like a sprint, and there's no finish line. This kind of time scarcity has real cognitive effects. Studies show that people experiencing chronic time poverty have reduced working memory, increased irritability, and higher error rates, which then get punished at work, creating a feedback loop. And yet the system pretends everything's fine because employment numbers look good on paper. But employment doesn't measure quality of life. It doesn't measure exhaustion. It doesn't measure how many people are one missed paycheck away from collapse. It doesn't measure the parents who never stop moving but never catch up. Time poverty also quietly kills community. When everyone is stretched thin, nobody has capacity to help anyone else. Social bonds weaken, isolation grows, And isolation makes people easier to manage, easier to market to, easier to divide. This isn't accidental. A population with no time has no energy to question the structure that's draining it. So when you feel like your life is just logistics work, commute, bills, recovery, repeat, that's not because you're failing at balance. It's because the system has recalibrated normal to mean exhaustion with a smile. The system depends on you, thinking this is temporary. This one is subtle and it's crucial. One of the biggest reasons burnout has exploded is because the system has convinced people that this moment is temporary, that relief is just around the corner. Just get through this year. Just survive this quarter. Just wait for inflation to cool, the market to stabilize, the election to pass, the next promotion to hit. That promise keeps people compliant. Hope becomes a management tool. But here's the reality most people don't want to face. Many of the pressures crushing Americans right now are structural, not cyclical. Housing costs aren't temporarily high, they're financialized. Healthcare isn't temporarily expensive, it's profit maximized. Workloads aren't temporarily intense, they're algorithmically optimized for maximum output. When systems are built this way, they don't naturally reset. They only change under pressure. And burnout sets in when people subconsciously realize that the relief they're waiting for isn't coming, but they haven't fully accepted it yet. That limbo is psychologically brutal. It's why people feel numb instead of angry, tired instead of motivated, detached instead of hopeful. The system benefits from this emotional suspension because it delays resistance. As long as you believe things will normalize on their own, you keep showing up. You keep complying, you keep burning, and when you finally break, the system reframes it as an individual mental health crisis instead of a predictable outcome of prolonged economic strain. That's why burnout feels so lonely, it's individualized by design. But once you see it clearly, something shifts. You realize millions of people are feeling the same pressure at the same time for the same reasons. And that's dangerous not for you, but for a system that survives by pretending everything is fine while quietly running people into the ground. Retirement was a lie, and everyone's too embarrassed to admit it. You want to know why millions of Americans over 50 are so quietly angry all the time? Because they're just now realizing the thing they worked their entire lives for retirement doesn't exist anymore. It's not delayed, it's not downsized, it's gone, and no one wants to say it out loud. You did everything right. You followed the rules, you worked the job, paid the mortgage, contributed to the 401k, and maybe even went without so your kids could have more. But now you're staring down your 60s or even 70s, and guess what? The numbers don't add up, not even close. According to Vanguard, the median 401k balance for people aged 65 and older is just $87,725. That's not enough to last 5 years, let alone 20. And Social Security? That monthly check barely covers rent in half the country, and the COLA increases don't even touch real inflation. Meanwhile, Medicare doesn't cover dental, hearing, vision, or long-term care, the exact things you actually need as you get older. So you know what happens? People keep working. Not because they want to, but because they have to. Walmart greeters in their 70s, Uber drivers in their 60s, seniors taking jobs at Amazon warehouses to stay active, while everyone silently pretends this isn't an economic emergency. And the most brutal part? The culture still blames you. You didn't save enough. You should have invested earlier. Why did you refinance the house? It's cruel. It's dishonest. And it gaslights an entire generation into silence. Retirement as a stable, dignified phase of life was dismantled piece by a system that turned your future into someone else's quarterly profit. Pensions were replaced with risky, self-managed retirement accounts. Interest rates on savings collapsed while rent, medicine, and food skyrocketed. You weren't unprepared, the goalposts were moved while you were working. And now millions of older Americans are burning out after the finish line. That's the final insult. You spent 40 years building a life, and now the system wants you to burn your remaining energy, proving you're still useful. If you're exhausted, you're not alone, and you're not crazy. You're witnessing the collapse of a promise that was never meant to be kept. The medical system is bleeding people dry and calling it care. Burnout doesn't always come from work. Sometimes it comes from being sick and scared and broke all at once. And right now, that's exactly where millions of people are stuck. You get older, your body slows down, and the system sees a new opportunity. You're not a patient, you're a revenue stream. AARP reports that 75% of adults over 50 have at least one chronic condition. You think that's a medical crisis? The system sees it as a subscription model. Every refill, every appointment, every test, it's monetized. Prescription costs in the US are 2 to 3 times higher than in other developed nations, and nearly 1 in 3 older adults now report skipping doses or rationing meds because they can't afford them, and that's just the beginning. Need a knee replaced, a hospital stay, cancer treatment? You're looking at tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, even if you have insurance. And God help you if you end up in an out-of-network ER. The average ambulance ride is now over $1,200. You can bankrupt yourself just trying to stay alive. And the paperwork, the billing errors, the fights with insurance, they don't tell you how mentally exhausting it is to be sick in America. You're not just fighting disease, you're fighting bureaucracy, predatory billing, and confusing networks that are designed to make you quit. It's no wonder seniors are reporting record levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, not because they're afraid of dying, but because they're terrified of the cost of staying alive. And let's not forget, most people don't have family nearby anymore. The kids moved away for work, or they're drowning in debt themselves. So older adults are dealing with this alone, isolated, trying to make impossible choices. Groceries or meds, heating or copay. It's a cruel game. The American healthcare system burns people out by putting a price tag on every heartbeat. And then it gaslights you by calling it the best in the world. If you're exhausted, overwhelmed, or quietly terrified of getting sick, that's not weakness. That's what happens when a nation lets its citizens rot so shareholders can hit their earnings targets. You were the backbone of America. And now you're treated like a burden. The system doesn't see older Americans as valuable anymore. It sees you as excess. After decades of work, taxes, service, caregiving, and sacrifice, the very system you helped build is quietly treating you like a problem to be managed. And that's not hyperbole. That's policy. You feel it in 1,000 ways: the cold shoulder at the doctor's office, the job application that gets ghosted once they see your age, the active adult communities that isolate you from everything real. And now, with rising entitlement costs, there's a growing political whisper campaign that seniors are bankrupting the system. The very people who looted pension funds, deregulated finance, and exploded healthcare prices have the nerve to blame you for being alive too long. A recent Congressional Budget Office report actually floated the idea of means testing Social Security translation. If you worked hard and saved, they'll cut your benefits. The goalposts are moving again, and the target is your dignity. Think about how twisted this is. In the 1980s, corporations started slashing pensions in favor of 401ks, pushing retirement responsibility onto individuals. Then the stock market turned into a casino, housing costs exploded, and healthcare outpaced inflation 4-1. And now, after all that, if you need help affording a basic existence, you're called entitled. You're not. You're owed. But the narrative is being rigged to make you feel like a drain. Why? Because that's how austerity works. Get the public to turn against the very people most in need, and no one notices the trillions vanishing upwards. Seniors are painted as out of touch, too expensive, or even in the way. But you're not in the way, you are the way. You raised the kids. You built the homes. You served in the wars. You paid the taxes. And now the system pretends your exhaustion is laziness. The truth? You were used. And millions of older Americans are waking up to that betrayal, which is exactly why the system is scrambling to silence your voice. You are not a burden. You are the proof that the American dream was turned into a subscription service. The American dream died quietly, and no one held a funeral. You ever look around and feel like something is missing? Like the country you're living in isn't the same one you were promised? That's not nostalgia. That's grief. Because here's the truth. No one says out loud. The American dream didn't die in a war or a recession. It bled out slowly while everyone was told to stay optimistic. And now that it's gone, the system's pretending it was never real to begin with. But it was. You remember it. A house you could afford on a single income. A job with benefits. a pension at the end, vacations you didn't need to finance, college that didn't chain your kids to debt, time with your family, weekends that actually felt like rest. That dream wasn't perfect, but it was tangible. And now, that dream has been replaced with debt, gig work, and subscriptions. You don't own anything anymore. You rent your phone, your car, your entertainment, your software, your security system, your mattress, your identity, and still, it's never enough. The finish line keeps moving, and the goalposts keep shrinking. And the cruelest part? The system now shames you for noticing. Why are you so negative? Why don't you just adapt? But you did adapt. You worked through recessions. You raised kids through inflation. You helped aging parents while trying to save for your own future. You adjusted to the internet, globalization, offshoring, automation. You did your part. But every time you caught up, the rules changed again. Now your kids can't afford a house. Your grandkids can't afford groceries. And you're still expected to tough it out. The American dream wasn't just about stuff, it was about security. A sense that tomorrow wouldn't be worse than today. That if you played by the rules, you wouldn't be punished for it. But that's gone now, replaced by uncertainty as a default setting. And millions of older Americans are quietly burning out not just from money stress, but from the heartbreak of realizing the country they believed in turned them into data points on someone else's earnings report. That grief is real. And until we acknowledge it, until we name it, nothing gets better. Because a nation that buries its dreams without mourning them is a nation that no longer knows what it's fighting for. Personal responsibility was a setup, and you're still paying for it. The entire idea of personal responsibility in America was weaponized. Not to empower you, but to silence you. Older Americans know this better than anyone because you lived through the bait and switch. You were told, work hard, save your money, stay out of debt, don't ask for help, and you'll be rewarded. But here's the truth, no one dares admit the game was rigged, and personal responsibility became the perfect excuse to blame you when it all fell apart. Did you lose your job to offshoring? You should have learned to code. Can't afford your meds? You should have gotten better insurance. Burned out and depressed? You just need to practice gratitude. It's all your fault. That's the script now, and it's disgusting. Because the same system that lectures you about bootstraps is the one that pulled the rug out. Wages haven't kept up with inflation since the 1970s. Housing prices have skyrocketed 500% since 1980 while real incomes stagnated. Healthcare premiums have tripled since the 1990s. And college costs? Up over 1,200% since 1980. Tell me, how exactly were you supposed to save more while all that was happening? And don't forget, entire industries were decimated by policy choices, NAFTA, deregulation, union busting. These weren't accidents. They were decisions made by people in suits who never paid the price. You did. And now, as millions of older Americans face burnout, poverty, or forced labor in their 60s and 70s, the system shrugs and says, well, you should have planned better. That's not advice. That's abuse. The lie of personal responsibility is that it isolates the victim and hides the thief. It keeps everyone too ashamed to compare notes, too proud to ask for help, and too busy surviving to organize. But it wasn't your spending habits that caused this mess. It was systemic extraction. Wall Street bailouts, stock buybacks, tax loopholes, corporate monopolies. You didn't fail. The social contract was shredded while they told you to smile and be resilient. Burnout isn't a personal crisis. It's the result of generations being told to clean up messes they didn't make. And the sooner we say that out loud, the sooner we stop feeling ashamed and start getting angry. Your burnout is their business model, and it's working perfectly. Your exhaustion isn't an accident, it's a product, a revenue stream, a feature, not a bug. Burnout in America isn't a glitch in the system, it is the system. Every part of the modern economy has been redesigned to make sure you're tired, distracted, anxious, and isolated. Because that's when people are the easiest to manipulate, the easiest to sell to, the easiest to control. Think about it. When you're exhausted, do you cook a healthy meal from scratch? Or do you order overpriced takeout through an app that charges fees on top of fees? When you're anxious about money, do you fight the bill or swipe the credit card and pray? When you're overworked, do you research the fine print or click accept all just to get through the day? That's the point. Burnout makes you compliant, and compliance is profitable. Entire industries are built around monetizing your stress. Streaming platforms for when you're too numb to think. Delivery apps for when you're too busy to cook. Buy now, pay later schemes for when your paycheck runs out. Productivity hacks, sleep trackers, meal kits, subscriptions. All of it pretending to solve the burnout problem while quietly feeding it. And older Americans, you're the prime target. Why? Because you still believe in stability. Because you want your grandkids to have a shot. Because you remember a world where things weren't like this, and that memory makes you dangerous. So the system distracts you with crisis after crisis, crime waves, culture wars, manufactured fear just to keep you exhausted and reactive. Meanwhile, the machine keeps humming. In the past 3 years, U.S. billionaires have added $2.1 trillion to their net worth. During the same period, personal debt hit record highs, evictions surged, and medical bankruptcies spiked again. Do the math. Your burnout isn't just tolerated, it's priced in. Your inability to rest is someone else's growth target, and the system will keep squeezing until you break because it knows you'll blame yourself instead of questioning the structure. But here's the truth. If you're tired all the time, if everything feels harder than it used to, if you're doing everything right and still falling behind, you are not the problem. You're the product. They need you, tired, divided, and quiet, because a rested population wouldn't tolerate this. The system needs older Americans burned out, isolated, and second-guessing themselves because a rested, clear-headed, connected population would never agree to live like this. Think about who you were when you were younger, when you had more energy, more time, more community. You questioned things, you organized, you showed up to school board meetings, union halls, town councils, churches, neighborhood groups. You talked to your neighbors, you compared notes, and that's exactly what the system has spent decades dismantling. Not with tanks or soldiers, but with exhaustion, with longer work years, with shrinking pensions, with healthcare anxiety, with debt hanging over your kids and grandkids, with nonstop noise and fear on the television, with algorithms feeding outrage instead of understanding. Because when people are tired, they don't revolt, they retreat. They blame themselves. They say, maybe it's just me, instead of realizing millions of others feel the exact same way. Older Americans are especially dangerous to a broken system because you remember a time when one income could support a family, when retirement was achievable, when neighbors looked out for each other, when the future didn't feel like a threat. Memory is powerful. It exposes lies, and that's why so much of modern culture tries to mock, dismiss, or sideline people over 50, not because you're obsolete, but because you're evidence. Evidence that this level of stress, insecurity, and burnout is not natural. And look at the cost. Record loneliness among seniors, rising suicide rates in men over 65, people dying at work or behind the wheel because they never get real rest. This is not a healthy society, it's a managed one. A system optimized to extract until the very end and then discard what's left. But here's the part they didn't count on. People are starting to connect the dots. You're not just tired, you're awake. And that's dangerous in a way exhaustion alone never was. Because once you stop believing the problem is you, once you stop apologizing for needing rest, dignity, and security, something changes. Burnout turns into clarity. Isolation turns into recognition. And silence turns into refusal. The system pretends everything's fine because it's terrified of what happens the moment enough people, especially those who remember how things used to be, say, no, this isn't normal, and we're not doing this anymore. This burnout, this bone-deep exhaustion so many of us are carrying isn't a personal failure. It's a system failure. And the system is pretending everything's fine because it needs you to stay quiet. But here's the truth. Once we start naming it, they can't hide it. So if you've ever felt like you're working harder than ever and falling further behind, if you've been told to just be grateful while everything around you gets more expensive, more unstable, and more hollow, drop a comment below. Tell your story. Speak up. Because the second we stop blaming ourselves and start seeing the pattern, that's when the real change begins, like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you're done pretending this is normal. We are tired, but we are not powerless. I see you, I hear you, and you are not alone. You.